Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Randy Bach. I'm with the Newton Taxpayers Association, and thrilled to have part two, or deux, of our conversation with Mr. Bill Heck, late of Meinrad Corporation, a hotelier, manager, businessman with financial sensibilities, and we are going to talk about the desire from Newton City government and perhaps some other people within Newton to have a tax override. What is it? What does it mean for us? Should we do it? Should we not? Why? Why not? Bill, would you like to add to your introduction?
Sure. In looking at the thought of an override, there's some basic positioning that we have to do, and I think that is going to be well stated. If we could have slide number 1, we can get right into this.
So there we go.
Here we have some information that I think puts an override into perspective, and it's the basis on which we should focus our conversations about an override. Because the fact that there is an override means that the city is contending that it does not have enough money to get the job done. So let's look at what the city is supposed to be doing. We, the taxpayers, pay taxes, and we continue every year to pay taxes for schools and teachers and their administration, for police and fire services and city administration, for infrastructure of all sorts, streets, sidewalks, for parks, for sustainability, for trees, for senior services, and more things. The list does go on. Overrides, by their definition, mean that the city can't pay for this. And it also means that we must pay for these things again. Because we pay taxes, and taxes have budgets, and budgets mean that we are provided certain things within the argumentation process of a budget, meaning there should be ranking of every element that we are going to have money spent on. And ranking is the way we understand which things are more important than other things. We all know, no matter how much money there is, we cannot do everything. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's a debate. That's what the city council should be doing and the school committee should be doing. And then there should be a budget that says this is what we're going to spend and this is what we're going to get. But I think the reality is that when the city, so to speak, claims it does not have enough money, what actually has happened is that the city spent the money on other things and has not maintained focus on the core services that the city administration and the school administration should be providing.
Right. So I'm going to interrupt slightly. Yes. We spoke earlier today and last month, which I recommend you look at as well if you can online. It's a little bit of a bait and switch, it seems, that the city has, it's kind of like when you have kids, you want them to eat the dinner first, then they go to dessert. A lot of times it seems that dessert gets given, and then it turns out they don't have enough money or food to present dinner. And so it's like, oh my God, you don't have your essentials, your meat and whatever else you want to have in your dinner, and then we're going to ask for extra for that, when it should have been the other way around. It seems like the dessert is the extra. And there are a number of extras. We've recently purchased Webster Woods. I just got a thing in the mail recently about the Gath Pool. That's my local country club. Well, I don't live too far from it, so you can see me there in the summer. But there's a pool there, and there's some rationale for having a new pool there. I mean, the pool seems fine. The place is a little rudimentary in the locker room, but all of a sudden $6 to $8 million, and when they have the hyphen there, $6 to $8 million, it's always going to be $10 or $12 million, but that's another story. And $10 million here, $16 million for Webster Woods. There's all these projects that seem nice, and it's great if you have the money and cash available, but those things get spent, those are part of the budget, then it's like, oh, now we don't have money for schools. So I'm going to hand it back to you, but that's my little take on the thing.
Well, that's a very good point that you bring up, because with much that I have read and with people with whom I have discussed the override, they're quick to point out that the mayor and the administration and the council have spent some significant amounts of money. Webster Woods comes to mind immediately. The senior center comes to mind immediately. And there are other things that have been funded and are funded out of operations. And now we are told that in order to maintain the schools as the city and the administration would like to see them maintained, it takes more money. And people I talk to call this a bait and switch, where if it were put on to an override question, would we buy Webster Woods, and would the public be able to vote on
That's
this?
a really excellent point. So the question would be to flip the menu around.
Correct.
And put dessert at the bottom of the menu, and put the main courses at the top, so that you already paid a certain amount, say, almost like a prefix dinner. You have a number of things that you can get, and then there's always some things else, like if you want to add lobster to your hamburger or whatever, it's a little bit extra, but you can have the basics, and then you could vote on the other aspects. I think that's a really interesting point. If the city wanted people to get these extra things like Webster Woods and the senior center, the Gath pool, whatever, maybe they can afford it, maybe they can't. But this is going to come up in your next slide. But Newton has more money now than it's ever had before in terms of revenue, and yet there seemed to have been very little preparation for potential bad times. It seems as if everything got spent on the presumption there's always be more. But now we're heading into a time of for relatively recently, the last few decades, record inflation. And this is going to, I'm sure it's going to lead to the question that, we can't run the schools for the same amount anymore. We're going to be paying more in heating bills and so forth. We have to raise the taxes for that. That's going to be around the corner. Just you watch. But in the context of our having, inflation expenses as taxpayers, citizens and homeowners and so forth, I'm wondering whether you might address some of those issues, like how Newton prepared for this, whether they've had enough, as it were, and how this compares to other towns perhaps as well.
Well, the way to look at this is for the past 5 or 6 years, there's been very low inflation, and Newton has assessed taxes to the full extent that they can, which would have been above inflation levels. So Newton should have been preparing for bad times in the future. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that we, the taxpayers, that have to pay our own utilities and taxes and pay for the cost of our homes and gasoline and all the other expenses of life, we have less buying power now than we did a year ago. And this is directly attributed to the administrations that we elect into office and what they choose to do and how they choose to do it, and this is the outcome. So we are going to live through this. For government now to come back and say they want more money, I think is very shallow.
Right.
I think it's a very, very shallow argument, right. And it's very out of touch.
So I'd like to bring up your slides, but I don't want to. I'd like to have the conversation as well. So maybe we can just show the slides for maybe 10, 20 seconds each while we talk, and then we'll come back to them. So why don't we go to slide number 2?
Sure.
So these are some of the points we've been making. They're not only just the fact that Newton kind of hews to the upper limit. They hew to the tax ceiling all along, which goes up 2.5% every year, according to Prop 2.5. They have, in the last 20 years, which I looked at recently over inflation numbers, 2.5% per year is about 10% higher over the last 20 years than actual inflation would have raised prices up. So they basically got to grow government about 10% more than they would have, even if they had just hewed to inflation numbers. So the government is growing, relatively speaking, and that's along with higher tax revenue and more things being built in Newton on top of it. So they have more revenue, but that's not even enough. Would you like to?
Well, let's talk about the revenue. Indeed, Newton has more money now than it has ever had in the past. And my feeling is enough's enough. If you're going to confront a city administration that will just simply say, well, we just never have enough money, well, tough. I mean, that's the way the world is. No one ever has all the money. But you got enough. Enough's enough, and you need to manage with that like anyone manages with a limited amount of money.
All right,
I don't care how much it is, it's limited.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's go to slide 3 briefly.
Well, the point is, if we have rising property tax revenues and we have new growth tax revenue and federal COVID funds and state COVID funds and more money than we've ever had before, we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And the reason we have a spending problem is the city does not budget based upon priority in its spending. Budgeting is a very disciplined process. And it's disciplined because we can't do everything. There are going to be winners and losers. There are things we can do, there are things we can't do. And we need to make those decisions and not just live in a world of mush where we have to do things because we want to give things lip service. Newton always adds to its budget. Mm-hmm. It never subtracts.
So maybe we could take this slide down for a second.
I would think that with the emphasis we have on STEM in this city, that subtraction could be added to the arithmetic of budgeting as well as addition. It seems like...
I mean, with all the science that ostensibly we've learned having gone through Newton schools, we would understand that one of the mathematical functions is subtraction.
That is correct.
Yeah,
and it has its place. And its place is that Newton needs desperately to live within its means, and to do so joyfully and skillfully. It is hard to manage within your means, but that's what an elected board is there to do.
It's kind of what adulthood's about.
It is exactly what adulthood is
about. The philosopher Mick Jagger, have you heard of the great philosopher Mick Jagger? He once said, you can't always get what you want. You can try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. And so he managed to, I think he titled his essay Satisfaction or something like that.
Well, that's the way to do it. And when we talk about living within means, the big driver in Newton is and has been in recent years been the growing cost of schools. There just seems never to be an ability to quench the thirst of the desired budgeting for schools. And what makes this kind of silly for intelligent people like educators is the cost of schools goes up. The student population has consistently gone down. It's gone down serious numbers, not just 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 or 20 or 100 students. It's gone down hundreds of students.
And what's the reason for that?
Well, there are lots of reasons. Their family sizes are smaller. A lot of people vote with their feet when it comes to education, and they choose to send their children to private schools or to homeschool their children. There are a lot of options that are coming up in homeschooling and cluster homeschooling. So I think when, and I don't want to get into the minutia of the content of curriculum or that sort of thing. It's rather simple to look at the school issue and say, why are the costs going up when the student counts are continually going down?
And just a little asterisk, I mean, the counts have gone down specifically more, so not just not just family size, but they went down specifically more in the last 2 years. And that, I think there was a, voting with your feet kind of thing to get people out of the schools because the schools were not providing their end of the bargain for teaching kids. I think there was a COVID overreaction for a populace that was not really at health risk, young people. But that's a side story.
Well, I think that's everywhere, so to speak. The philosophy of the schools differed with the philosophy of parents, and so there's a blowout. However, that's not a new thing. Since 2013, when we had an override and more money was given to the city, because there were these estimates of growing student population, the student population has continually gone down since that time.
Right.
So,
So maybe we could just go to slide 4 briefly.
well, let's talk about time to rethink Newton schools. But the troubling thing about the thought of rethinking Newton schools is that no one is doing it now. There is this drive to continue as is and not to rethink and reshuffle. But in reality, Newton schools, let's go to slide 5. Newton schools need to reimagine themselves and their costs and to shrink their costs. I'm not suggesting that you go in with a paper cutter or a pair of scissors and just whack on a budget. Budgets are very contemplative processes. They're difficult, they're tied to strategies, and I think that moving the institution of Newton schools into a new phase of a new way of looking things is important. Let me just bring something up.
Let's bring the slide down.
Let's think about something. In 2023, the school budget is $262 million. 262. That's up $9 million from the previous year. $262 million. Now I'm going to give a hypothetical question here, but it's going to make a point. Let's assume that some major things have happened, whatever they may be, and now we must cut the school budget to $250 million, from 262 to 250. What will happen if that were to occur? Well, I think the answer is that a lot of people would jump up and down, they'd rant and rave, they would cry and gnash their teeth.
They would say, first of all, the arts and music is gone. Sports are gone. They tend to go for the part that you think you like the most. Those are the first things that are going to be cut. It's not going to be any of the kind of back office or the recent add-ons. Just as a quick aside, I went to public school as a kid and then private school, and I think I've mentioned the story before, but I didn't get sent to the principal's office very much, but at one point I did some work as a student for the school. And in the office back then, this is ancient times, I think there were dinosaurs outside. I don't know. I think I might have seen a pterodactyl. But anyway, there was a principal, assistant principal, there was a secretary, and a nurse. And there wasn't really the whole architecture that we have now in the schools. If you look at the masthead of any of our schools, websites, there's a huge, thick layer of people getting salaries that, they all have roles, but a lot of them are special ed and ESL and psychological services, all that kind of stuff. And the school has kind of subsumed other roles aside from teaching. Now, were we worse educated by virtue of having a teacher? For, we had like 30 kids in the class, something like that, probably big by today's standards. I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not sure that kids come out categorically better now than back then. And yet, if you just were, this would be an interesting, slide in itself at some point to make, is like just to look at the kind of education roster of teachers, back, say, I don't want to go to my ancient times, but, 30 years ago, something like that, and see now. I would assume that it's, from my time, it's easily 5 or 6 times more people on the roll. But even from, say, 20 years ago, I think there are far more human beings around. And it's nice if you can do it. It's nice if you can afford it. But again, I don't think it's infinite, the number of things we can afford.
Pictures are worth 1,000 words. I saw a picture of one of the elementary schools that was taken from the look of the cars. It looked like back in the 60s at some time. And there were a few cars around this school, and it was during school time. And then I saw a picture that was taken a few years ago around that same school, and it looked more like Muzzy Ford when it was in business than it did a school. I couldn't believe the number of cars, and those cars are, of course, tied to people who work in that building.
Right.
And they
there's
have
a whole
gone
structure
up
outside.
Exponentially.
All right, so
But let's come back to this.
Right.
What would happen if this budget of $262 million for cataclysmic reasons had to be cut to $250 million? We're going to cut $12 million out of it. Well, I think after all the hysteria, that people would get down to business, and they would figure out how to make great schools with only $250 million. Because we're talking.
So how many students, how much does that come out to per student? We ever calculated that? Another day, another topic.
Well, let's do that another time.
Yeah, but I'd like to, we're going to have to wrap up soon. We have about 8 more minutes.
All right.
So let's structure that. See if we can, you're going to like this, see if we can budget our time.
Then let's go to slide 6. We've often heard that Newton has a structural deficit, and if that's the case, then it's time for a structural reform. And before you can do a structural reform, you have to have a framework, or there will be no reform. And those things have everything to do with people buying into change, with negotiated reductions in payrolls and rates of pays and job classifications, negotiated significant reductions in health care costs, and negotiated significant reductions in pension. And these things are easier to do than one might think. For example, the health care costs could drop radically by going on the Mass Group Insurance Commission program, where it's just a bigger buy from the insurance perspective and the rates go down. I know the city has been dancing around with this, but they haven't moved forward. The other thing on pensions, to make the city the guarantor of whatever the future is going to be.
Let's pull the slide down.
Yeah, making the city the guarantor of what the future will be seems a little unfair. And
right, regular companies, such as your hotelier company,
yes,
they didn't have the luxury of future taxation. So they had to make do. If they promised their employees a benefit, they put in the money and the account would be there. And theoretically, that account would be the 401k is in a sense a kind of an annuity bank account. I don't think we do that in the city. I think we have these unfunded mandates we've talked about. But we only have 4 minutes left. So I think we might want to finish off with your last 2 points and 2 slides.
Fine.
Let's just put them up and 20 seconds each, say.
if you believe that we can't afford more tax and spend mediocrity, then we really encourage you to vote no on this override. Because if you don't, we will have more tax and spend mediocrity. Newton must dare to reimagine its schools and city services. It must think new ways, and it's time to rethink and expect results in that regard.
Right.
And the bottom line, a no override vote
Let's pull that down.
is a blunt instrument to demand results.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see results, say no. If you want no change, if you want this train to keep going right down the same tracks, then vote the override in, and
Right,
you
so-
will get no improvement.
So I'm going to add two small points. One is that your next slide, we're going to come to in a second, is about what happens. You know, people want many things. They want diversity, and in your case, you bring out that high taxes drive out elderly, they discourage families, and they discourage low-income households. And the thing is, you know, we need to do better. We need to have responsibility. Other towns are not doing the same override. Towns like Newton, I think Arlington is not doing this. In fact, I think they might have had a rebate for some of their tax funds and so forth. I went on the mass.gov site, which I recommend. We'll try to put up links to it. There's a mass.gov site about explaining to city officials what the Proposition 2.5 means in tax limits and levy limits and all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to bore you with the whole thing, but I did learn one thing. There is actually such a thing as an underride.
Yes.
We only hear overrides. We never hear underrides, which is something else that the city could bring up if they wanted to, you know, make things easier for their taxpayers and try to attract low income and diversity and so forth. So you have many different desires. You have to pick which one, you know, warrants the most of your attention. I'm just going to give one quick aside. I belong to a sports club, and for the last 2 years, I mean, prior, everyone was all green. They wanted to use few fossil fuels as possible and so forth. For the last 2 years, they had the heat on with all the doors and windows open. You know, so they're running their fossil fuel in the winter to heat the environment, which they theoretically want to save, but they have it on turbocharge because they're worried about a virus. So again, these are conflicting interests. You have to kind of pick a lane and decide which one you want to do. If you want greater diversity, if you want a cohesive city that has fiscal responsibility, is going to carry into the next generation, then you have to, in our view, vote no on the override and try to help us out at Newton Taxpayers Association. We're on Facebook. Give us your name, number, and we'll try to help you organize the next pathway towards a more responsible city. Bill, last word?
I would say we look forward to the city administration and the council and the school committee rising to the challenge of presenting quality at a really decent price. That's the goal of the taxpayers. That's what we want.
Well, thank you, Bill. And you know, please contact us and follow us up with the Newton Taxpayer Association on Facebook, and we'll try to make some other links for you shortly. Thank you so much.